Hello, my name is Peter Englert. I'm one of the co-hosts of the Why God Why podcast. We exist to respond to the questions that you don't feel comfortable asking in church. We are brought to you by Browncroft Community Church in beautiful Rochester, New York. I am here with my illustrious co-host, Aaron Mercer. Hello, hello.
I feel like I have a lot to live up to every time you say illustrious.
It's good. It's good.
All right. We'll go with it right now.
Go with it. And then our spectacular producer, Nathan Yoder. So he is in the background dancing. We love that. We are in a series that is about why is blank spiritual. And today the question we're asking is, why are rhythms spiritual? We are here with a friend that I've made. His name is Jairus Williams. He works for Rooted, and he lives down in South Carolina, but Rooted is outside of the Southern California. But we're going to talk about rhythms, and I don't know, Aaron, what are some of your thoughts on rhythms? Do you have any?
Yeah, no, I think it's going to be a good series. It's going to be a good conversation here. Rhythms are it's funny, we were just coming out of a series where we were talking about goals, and I think this flows well from that. We've had conversations about different spiritual practices over the times, and certainly rhythms are something that we need to be paying attention to. We see rhythms all around us all the time, so we might as well discuss whether or not they're spiritual or not. So I'm looking forward to this, especially because we get to talk about Rooted too, so that'll be fun. I think I should throw in there, I mean, Rooted, that was one of the ways I got to know you, Peter, right? I mean, back in the day, the Rooted group. So we'll get more into that in a minute, but yeah, why don't we throw it to Jairus?
Hey, without further ado, Jairus, why don't you introduce yourself and just kind of share a little bit of your story and just kind of your faith journey?
Yeah, man. Yeah, really good to be on here with you guys. And man, illustrious is something that's difficult to live up to over there, bub. So I'm waiting to be wowed by this illustriousness this whole time.
Don't hold your breath.
Man, I'm excited to be with you. Don't hold your breath. All right. I grew up in the South. I was born into a Christian household. Really felt this tug early in life, but really didn't find, my footing in what I would say is owning my own faith until I was, into my late teens. And then, got into a great church, great youth group, and started leading worship, learned how to play guitar, so that I could lead worship in the youth band by youth band, it was just, two old dudes with a guitar and me in the middle, strumming along with them and singing. But I quickly found that I just loved it, man. And I loved Jesus, and I knew that I wanted to serve him, with my whole heart, but I didn't really know fully what that meant. And coming up in a Christian household, in a little bit more of a Baptist background, we so many times, I carried around a lot of the guilt and shame kind of culture of you do these things, and when you step out of line there, the disappointment that came with that kind of followed me for a long time. So much of my spiritual journey, kind of hangs on to that, kind of thread, and being a creative, we're talking about rhythms today, but being a creative, I really bucked what the traditional sense, or what my pastors would say, hey, these are the things that you need to do. To get up early in the morning and read your Bible, and and have your prayer time in the morning first thing. And I was like, well, man, I like to sleep in. I want to stay up late. I don't want to do these things. And I can learn about God and His greatness and His majesty through these means, and not just by this means. And so it was a lot of wrestle tug back and forth. But many years later, fast forward, been in ministry of some sort for about 20 years, serving mainly in worship ministry. And Rooted and I are interesting bedfellows. We're interesting soulmates. I went to California to be a worship leader on staff, and was introduced to Rooted, I guess, about a year after they had first founded over in Africa at one of our partner churches. And as they partnered together and brought it, we might have run 1 or 2 semesters by the time that I got there. And so my Rooted group that I ran in the fall of 2011 still has text messages coming across this morning from the guys that are there. We still go on trips. I haven't lived in California in 4 years, but yet they've been like my best buds for this whole 10-year journey through Rooted. And so it really, the thing for me, and we'll talk more about Rooted later, I know, but the rhythms conversation and how it affected me through that process is what it really showed me is that, man, we're there, like you said, there are rhythms all around us and rhythms that we naturally lean into, and how we get out of those so easily and get into other ones so easily is something that was really profound to me, and how I found that, like, wow, when I sit down to do my devotion and I pray to God and I, ask for forgiveness, man, I'm popping, 3 rhythms that are so important in my life right there together. When I, reach out to somebody and help somebody, these different rhythms that are just missing, it helps highlight what's really going well and then what's not going so well. And man, it just transformed me as a pastor, getting to go through Rooted and be in the lives of people. So yeah, it's been quite a journey. And so we've been back on the East Coast for a few years now. Worked at Seacoast Church here on the East Coast, and then just went full time with Rooted and Still Serve. I'm going to do a couple weeks in a row leading worship, and then hang my guitar back up for a few weeks and let the people with less gray hair in their beard lead for a few weeks, and then I'll come back and be the jolly mentor figure, worship leader coming back in.
So I want to back up just a little bit, because you're quite the conundrum. You're a creative musician that works for an organization that has disciplines and rhythms, and I think we're going to see that play out. But what's your definition of rhythm? And not music rhythm, because that, but also Christians talk about rhythms, but if I'm outside of church, what's a rhythm that I might say I might not even know it's a rhythm? So what's the definition of rhythm, and what are kind of maybe some non-churchy rhythms that you've noticed and just kind of seen people kind of follow?
Oh yeah, man. Yeah. I think, you say not musically rhythm, but even in the context, like the rhythm of a song to words, it brings context to what the words are saying so many times. So if I read a poem to you, the poem means one thing, but the way that I say it, and the cadence that I say it, if I were to put music to it, those things bring illumination to what's going on. And I think sometimes rhythms do that too. Like, healthy or unhealthy rhythms. Even non-spiritually, like my dog knows when I leave, when I come home, when I come downstairs, I sit on the couch, he comes right to that spot. He knows, like, I have these rhythms that are every day, like the natural rhythm of when I like to go to bed and when I like to wake, the rhythms of when I need to get out and just refresh and get outside of the work context or all those things. I think, nature wise, we're surrounded by rhythms. The seasons come in rhythms. And we know that around January, I'm going to have this kind of internal thing that I should be eating better. I should be working out more. I should be, re-upping on some things that I've let kind of go to the wayside. When I get to about April and the sun starts to come out, I'm going to notice how pale I am and how I need to start, getting back out, and I see blooms and I start to feel something different in me, like in the way that the spring is kind of like awakening something in me from the gray season. So I think that there are rhythms, everywhere. And, I think about, even the tides, man, it's like the tides, roll in and out, they go low and high, but that rhythm never stops there. And so I think, we have natural rhythms that we get into in our daily lives, but the world is like surrounded in these beautiful rhythms that continue to come around. And so how do we make them fresh, and how do we not slip into ones is kind of the trick, right?
No, that's good. I was thinking about that as you were talking, and the rhythms that we, that are around us, like Peter said, that we're not even really paying attention to, and you delved into that too. And I was even starting to think a little bit more about how does that affect us day to day? How does that, in ways that we might not even be thinking about, might be something you were talking about January and then April, like spring, things you might look forward to, like the sun coming out again and getting warmer, and that changes your perspective. And but it could be, you go home at a certain time normally, and you have dinner at a certain time, and you're looking forward to that. Maybe there's a certain TV show that comes on once a week that you're, eager to see the next episode. I don't know. There's all sorts of rhythms that are out there. I was even thinking about like social media. I mean, there's times that some people are on social media all the time, but like, there's also, I think there's, for a lot of people, there's certain times that you might be more likely to be scrolling your social media feed, that may not be the healthiest or not healthiest, but it's something that happens. And I guess where I'm going with all this is I wonder sometimes how much that affects how we approach everything else in during our day, depending on what some of those rhythms are that we may have identified and maybe not have identified. I mean, do you think that there's we can get to spiritual in a minute, but do you think there's some rhythms that are helpful to us versus not? And are we stuck with them whether we like it or not?
Yeah, I mean, so much of rhythm sometimes brings up the word habit, for me. And I think sometimes even the way, if you're, where you work, where you park, where you walk in, who you see and who you don't see, when you walk through, when you're doing your way to your desk, the people that you hang out with and the rhythms that you kind of just build in, when you eat might, dictate who you eat with, or who you don't eat with, and so like how you can avoid, like you pull into your house, you just drop the garage door down versus going and having dinner with somebody or saying hello to a neighbor. These different things are all become kind of rhythms. And like, and I'm a major creature of habit, in a weird way too, even though I like to be creative and I like to have some spontaneity. There'll be times when I'm driving and my wife's like, where are you going? And I was like, because I've just gone this way and that's the way that I'm turning and I'm going on the interstate. And that means that I'm going to this place, but I know that I should be going to this place. I was like, and so I try to play it off like I didn't really mean to do that. I was like, oh yeah, I was just going to take a different way. Yeah, you're right. I probably should go this way instead. But it really is just this this ingrained thing that life tends to build in these habits and rhythms that, can seem non-harmful, but can actually build in some rigidness that doesn't allow us. And I don't think that they're forever, for sure. I mean, I think that you can build new rhythms, but it does take effort, and it takes intentionality, and it takes a lot of really intentionally approaching what you're doing to break that habit.
Well, and there's a dichotomy, because I think even why we're asking this question is there's people that don't know their rhythms. So we joke here all the time. Christmas is December 25th from now till eternity. But everybody like wakes up December 1st and says, oh yeah, Christmas. Like I need to get presents. And how many of us are, you can't do this on Amazon, but how many of us are at Target, 10 a.m. Christmas Eve? And then, there's another sense of this. I was recently talking with a friend, and, he was talking about spontaneity, and he was trying to say to his wife, like, hey, like, we can't be spontaneous when we have something planned every single day. And so I think what I'm kind of wondering is, as we back up and look at the culture around us, we have a portion of people that they're almost too rigidly rhythmatic, if I can say that. And then we have other people that have no idea, what their rhythms even are. And so I guess, like, from your vantage point, what is it about knowing your rhythms that is so helpful that you should be asking this question? You should be thinking about it.
Yeah, man. I think it really does attach, the rhythms attach, and how they work in your life really does weirdly attach to how we're wired. Like the way that I'm wired and the way that you're wired are so different, but the rhythms will kind of shield and shade and bend and move us in some ways, or the lack of even wanting to pay attention to them will still, it doesn't deny the fact that the rhythms are there. And so I think for us, for me, I just knew, the more that I started to learn about my personality type, my the Enneagrams, the Myers-Briggs and things like that, like as I took these tests too, it really helped illuminate, how do I like to learn? When do I like to get into different things? things. What are pieces and parts of my personality that want to shun that, and then what I want to lean into. And so that was super helpful. I think, but I think that knowing them, I think just like anything, I mean, we need to take a snapshot here and there and go, man, like what rhythms have I gotten myself into right now? If I were to take a snapshot of my week, I mean, by like 7 p.m., I've been sitting in front of the television, like binge watching Survivor Australia. And we've been going through season after season because the other Survivor is over. And so we were like, so we're looking through and we find that and we're like, wow, this is awesome. And so my wife and I have like glued a spot in the chair the last little while, and it's creating a rhythm that at some point is going to have to break and needs to break, so that we can actually enjoy other things that are really important, or if my kid is coming home and he's 18 and in college, so he's running upstairs and kind of goes to his room. Like, I've got to break that rhythm for him sometimes by going in and just open the door saying, dude, how you doing, man? Like, what's going on? Tell me what's going on at school, or make him hang downstairs with me a little bit longer. So we need people in our lives as well to help us break out of certain rhythms that we would because we'll naturally glide into the ones that are probably the least intrusive, in our daily lives.
So I'm going to be annoying because we have an ongoing joke about the Enneagram, and you brought it up. And we did an episode where we tried to figure out Aaron's type, but that's a whole nother thing. So walk us through personally, because I think this is going to be helpful for our listeners. You've done some work on your personality type. So walk us through the Enneagram, walk us through the Myers-Briggs, and just how you're engaging rhythms. Because I think I can hear some people like, I need a rhythm, like I want it, like let's do it. And I can hear other people like roll their eyes. So help people through your personality and your experience. Just walk us through your types and how you've engaged it and how that's helped you.
Yeah. So, we use the DISC test a lot. It was a version of the DISC, over in California, which is more color based. So like I'm yellow, which is high, kind of that sanguine, which was what they would use back in the old days on some of those. The Myers-Briggs would say ENFP, so I'm kind of this outgoing extrovert, love to be around people. But then I'm also, I found that like the red, which is like this kind of more, you got to get these things done. I have to dial that up when I'm at work because that's not my natural tendency. But if I don't dial it up, I get run over, and so it's like, and then the people that are a little more like red aggressive, short, those kinds of things, I don't interact well with them, and I'm not on their rhythm that they need or their interaction type. And when you look at Enneagram, I'm like, I don't want to be 2-3, but I am 2-3. Like I want to be more 8-7 because that's cool and, aggressive and like get things done and determined, along with some yellow. But I really, the more that I, dive into it, the more that, man, I love to say, man, how can I serve you? I love to say, man, how can I come around your team and like, love on your staff, and, how can I help somebody else to be the best that they can possibly be and illuminate that. And so, man, those were, and so there's some 3 in there, which is like a little more competitive and, and I want to achieve. But where it's really helped me the most is in the downsides of those things is that, man, when I don't feel appreciated, when I don't get the attaboy, when I don't, when I feel like I'm doing something and it feels like it's for nothing or it's overseen, things like that, man, I feel down and I withdraw out. And so from a rhythm standpoint, when people see me withdrawing and kind of like sheltering out, like, if I have some good friends around me, like it can help me. Or if I find myself just not wanting to be around people ever, like, I don't want to engage that way, I go, man, like something's going on in here. And so I need to like press myself into, like, for the longest time, like here I am coaching on small groups, and like we had a small group kind of dissolve from some people moving and some different things. And I was just like, I just don't, I just didn't want to get back into that, didn't want to like re-engage. And here I am teaching people, on how to do that on a daily basis. But yet I just was, kind of pulling away from it. So it's like, it helped me to go like, all right, well, why is that? Like what's in there? And like, what's kind of, going against my natural flow of who I am that makes me want to withdraw in that way. And so it's helped in that way for sure. I don't think that they're, the definer of everything of who we are, but it's really helped me to understand how to put myself in positions where I can succeed better.
So rhythms are an important part of Rooted. I know the Rooted study. I mean, can you give a quick, not, it doesn't have to be quick, but an overview of what Rooted is, and for those who don't know, and what is maybe a little bit of the history of it, but then more about like what is it actually?
Yeah. Rooted came out of this heart from our pastor of looking at our small groups and looking at the people in our church. And he was like, man, I know that there's life change happening out here, but I can't pinpoint where. And he's like, I look at my groups and they really love each other and they're inwardly focused and they love to meet together, but I'm not seeing life change. I'm not seeing them going out and being missional. I don't see them praying for one another. And I really want them to be focused on the people around them and not just the people in that one group, And so he was, man, they loved each other so much. I couldn't get them to focus outwards. And so he started looking for something to help with that and happened to find it in one of our global residents that was on staff. They were going to Kenya together and found it at a church over there, and they were just having these spiritual conversations and gathering in groups. And then their language is to go out and be fearless influencers in their communities. And it was just like this beautiful picture. I mean, and it was it was this more intense thing. Like we were saying, gather together, like watch something if you want, just, discuss something, maybe biblical, but then, meet every other week or meet, every fourth week or whatever. But they were meeting every week for 10 weeks. They were going out and doing these, these prayer, adventures together, and they were serving the community and all these things. And so it just became this thing that he was like so enamored by, that they partnered together and put it in English and wrote some American stories and kind of partnered with some other international people. And we started running it, and, clunky at first, honestly, like we clunked through and made some changes and watched how people just started, knowing each other better, and people started, getting outside and making a difference in the community around them. And really they started seeing a few years in, man, there's these rhythms that are baked into this thing. It didn't start with the rhythms there. I mean, they started with it there, but they weren't defined. And so they started to go, wow, like is daily devotion, is getting around and like, man, I got to spend time thinking and thinking about God, getting in the word, journaling with him, prayer, repentance, serving the community, being open-handedly generous, sharing my story, worshiping. And if we could get people in this compressed amount of time to make a high buy-in kind of step into something different, because you're going to have to do something different if you want different results, which, for me was always the hard part, right? It's like, no, I can do what I'm doing and God can do something, amazing, which is true. But if you really want to see something extraordinary, you probably have to take a step in a different direction and take a risk. And it was just, has been beautiful to watch people come out with a hunger and to go like, wow, I didn't know that these rhythms kind of laid dormant. I thought I had them down. Like I knew how to pray. I knew that I should read my Bible. I knew that I should be generous. I knew those things. But there's something different when you have to put it into action that God teaches you in the midst of that, that's just special, So, so those rhythms, I think, are the things, especially for people who are like, man, I've been a believer all my life. Like, I know all these foundational things. It's like, well, all right, well, how are those rhythms doing? Like, what's your daily devotion look like? And what's prayer looking like? And how are you serving your community and being generous? And like, well, I don't have all those perfect. It's like, well, of course you don't. Like, I mean, none of us have all those perfect, and they all start to go by the wayside at some point, and they need a refreshing. And so that's what's so great about Rooted, is it gives you that kind of 10-week time to go, man, let's really draw near and see what God does.
So I love that description. I think some of our listeners would probably be like, man, what is Rooted? And they're learning more about it. But, I just kind of want to back up a little bit in this way. So think of someone that hasn't come to church or de-churched on church, and then think about yourself, because you've talked about this. You don't always love having expectations on you. What is it about a 10-week experience? What is it like? Because in Rooted, a lot of times you don't pick the people you're in small group with. You're like, this is the most awkward blind date. We don't say like,
oh, for sure.
These are like the 10 to 12 people in your group. And And again, I hear people that want to spiritually change, and I love how you put it that like you have to do something intentional that's out of the ordinary. And so what is it about this experience? But then also, what is it about being a person that doesn't necessarily want someone to tell them the rhythms? What do you miss when you don't? I'll even use the word acquiesce to at least try this.
Yeah, man, that's a great question. I think one of the things that I've found, and I was reading one of my favorite books is Power of Moments by Dan and Chip Heath, and I love the way they write, and not a Christian book, but just full of like, man, what are the power of these moments? And I think the thing that I think the book is beautifully written. I mean, obviously it builds on itself well. So if you're new to the faith and you haven't been, you don't know these things, it starts in a way that we're going to all go, yeah, like, this builds the way that it should. But I think, you can read that book by yourself and not get the same impact that you would going through it with a group of people, but also in the process of how it's kind of laid out. Because I think in the midst of that, we're going to talk about some of these things, but we're also going to go out and practice some of them. So when we talk about prayer, we're going to go out and do a prayer experience together. When we talk about serving, we're going to go out and do a serve experience together. And when you do that, what Chip and Dan Heath would say is there's a couple things that work. Like one, this thing is elevated, and so it and it's asking more of you in a really defined amount of time. And so it's giving you this thing that's like, wow, this is elevated. And so you seem to kind of pay attention more and kind of walk into it with a different expectation than if I was just to give you a book and say, hey, read this every day by yourself. Like there's things to help you along the way, and to kind of pull you into wanting to just give this thing a shot, but then also, they talk about a thing called stretching for insight, and they say that insight rarely leads to action, but action almost always leads to insight. Right. So if you tell me, Jairus, you need to get up and go, run around the block, and you need to exercise more and eat better, I know that intrinsically. I know it to my core. If you tell me, man, I need to read my Bible more, all those things, I totally know it. But going through Rooted and experiencing it, and going into whatever activity it may be, whether it's the exercise of these new rhythms that you're trying to get when you come around the first of the year, you are putting yourself these things to action. And so it's not pass fail, it's learn. What did I learn on each side of what I'm doing here? And so by stretching myself into something that's uncomfortable, I now learn something about who I am, and I learn something about what I just went into. And it could be positive or negative. It could be like, wow, I need to grow in that, or like, wow, that was like so invigorating, whatever that may be. You're really just looking for the insight. And so I think what Rooted gives above all things is like, man, if you'll dedicate 10 weeks to these rhythms, and like, because they're not a naturally part of who we are, and it's not a natural part of what we're doing. Most of the time we wrap our discipleship around our time, and not our time around our discipleship. And so, man, to be able to like go, I'm going to give God the first piece here. I'm going to stretch myself and do these things that are uncomfortable, and then see what I learn about myself and about God in the process. That, I think, is where the power of Rooted really comes in for people, is that, give yourself a chance to be stretched outside your comfort zone, and then see how God meets you there.
Yeah, that's good. I really, I think the Rooted curriculum is really great. It's been a blessing, I know, in my life. It's for those who don't, are trying to get their minds around what exactly it is. I mean, you mentioned it's 10 weeks, and it's 10 weeks. I kind of thought about it, and this probably isn't the best way you can correct me. You work for the Rooted Network, but it's it's almost kind of a back to the basics in some ways, like rhythms, habits that we should be cementing ourselves around. For those who have been Christians for some time, we know that. For those who have not been Christians for very long, or maybe aren't Christians yet, they don't know that. Either way, you're kind of coming back to these basic elements, basic rhythms of reading your Bible, and giving, and serving other people, and you're investing a limited period of time to really dig into that. And I loved what you said about having community around you, because I know for me, I found that to be you can go read, like you said, you can go read a book, and that, to me, that's really important. I unlike you and Peter, I'm more the introverted kind, and so that's a time where I learn a lot. But when you have a community with you, even if there are people like like Peter said, you don't know ahead of time, there's accountability to do that. But there are things that I learned by listening to others as they went through the Rooted program that I wouldn't have picked up otherwise, just from my own reading. So I think that's really cool. And I imagine you probably see that in a lot of different places as you are helping churches develop these groups. And you mentioned how it's an investment of 10 weeks. Have you tended to see these rhythms that are focused on and Rooted? Have you found that they carry on past that 10 weeks? I mean, people are investing. Does it build after that?
So if you don't mind, Jairus, I'm going to jump in. I want to kind of respond to that.
Totally.
Get it. Because, so it's funny, I'm an Enneagram 2, Wing 3, just like you.
Come on.
But I'm an ENFJ. So
yeah.
And so, I think and this is why I wanted to respond to Aaron's question to kind of push back, because I am super structured. Like, I've been reading my Bible and praying almost every day since 4th grade. And the biggest growth area that I need, and even rhythm-wise, is actually to break the rhythm. So, for example, a few weeks ago, I drove to Philadelphia to see some friends, and that was like, I didn't know how much I needed that. Now, I listened to the Rise and Fall of Mars Hill for the whole 6 hours of that trip, which I had to talk to my therapist wife about a lot, but we'll leave that later. But, I think something that Rooted did was, like, I needed, as someone that's so committed to rhythms, I needed to break my rhythms to kind of bring it back. So that's kind of my response, because, excuse me, because I'm concerned, whoever you are listening to it, I tend to be on that side. And because we don't stop, and this is kind of where it's disconnected from Jesus, when you're connected to Jesus, there is a healthy tension of, I'm going to be committed, have habits, but at times I need to break them in the right way. So I'll let you answer for you, but as kind of the opposite of you, I think that's helpful to some of our listeners.
It's so helpful. Well, I think what you're hitting on, and which is so beautiful, is that I think, and we do this so much as Christians, anything that we can take that leads us to some sort of positive relationship with God in one season of our lives, we will kind of make the thing that forever it needs to be this. I did A, I added B, and it equaled C. So it will always equal that. And that is the only way I can approach the Bible. It's the only way I can approach church. It's the only way I can approach my prayer, whatever it is. And I think that the rhythms in our lives get stale. And sometimes we go, man, I read this, but it doesn't have life, because God's calling us into more. I think he's trying to break us out of, the rhythms that I had at 16 when I first came to know Jesus are not the same rhythms that are now. They're not even the same rhythms from, a few years ago. And from last year, even I'm doing things different even in this season to try to shock my system into a new way of relating and understanding who God is. I'm listening to different podcasts that give me a better understanding of the background of the Bible so that I can understand him more. And I'm going, man, I'm so alive and hungry right now. But I think that what we sometimes in something like a Rooted, and it could be other things, but in something that we do, that we dedicate time to, like this, that's going to step us out of our comfort zone. Sometimes you're exactly right. It is to reorient and, disorient and reorient us into a new understanding of who God is. And I think, but we're in good company, because the Israelites did it all the time. Like, they were like, man, this is how we approach God. He's in this little box. And it's like, nope, he's not in that little box. He's over here in this tent. It's like, oh, well, now he's not in the tent. Maybe he's up on the mountain. Like, oh, he's in the tabernacle. Like, oh, he's in the synagogue. Like, he's like, and so Jesus and God continue over the course of it to break the expectation of where and how, and all in a hope and a heart of drawing us deeper, and so that's the thing for me, and some great mentors of mine that would like love to journal, love to read. He would just sit in front of his computer and go, man, like I don't feel a thing from you. I don't know where you are. I'm searching. And, he's having his David in Psalms kind of moments of like, where in the heck are you? And I'm surrounded by oppressors and all these things. And God was just calling him into more. And so now his rhythms look different. And we've got to, like anything else, if I approach my wife in the exact same way every day and said the exact same things and tried to conversate with her in the exact same way, she's going to let me know it pretty soon. So I've got to in this relationship with God, we've got to, find some develop our rhythms and redevelop them and then watch them become new. So that's a wonderful point.
Yeah. What when in the rooted groups that you have been you've seen take off through the different, how big is the Rooted Network, by the way? I won't ask that question.
Yeah, we're well over 1,000 churches now, and
wow,
nationwide. There's some in Germany, there's some in the UK, there's Indonesia, all over the Mexico, Canada. So we're growing really rapidly right now.
Wow, that's pretty. Yeah. That's pretty all over the world too.
Yeah. We're working on different translations to help with that. But in our limitedness, we're still helping in some different areas. It's been pretty cool to see.
So for those churches that are, I know that's a lot of churches. So there's different stories for each church, I'm sure. But what have you found after once a church gets a Rooted program going? What are their experiences with those groups? I mean, after the 10 weeks, I guess maybe that was part of where I was going with the last question, but like what happens after people have made that 10-week investment?
Yeah. Well, the hope, right out of the gates is that, those people, that Peter started to talk about, these strangers, these weirdos that you're like, man, there's no way I'm doing life with these people. They become people that you can't live without. Right. I just saw it, and I'll speak for myself as I led groups. There would be groups all the time that I'd look and go, man, how are these people going to connect? I mean, the different ages, different stages of their walk with Jesus, some not following, some following, some married, some not. And there was always this like trepidation walking in, like, man, how are they going to connect? And how's this group going to go? But by because of the things that, they prescribe some things, and we need to have some things prescribed for us as we're journeying towards something new, right? Like we prescribe storytelling in there, like, hey, take some time. Like you guys, 2 people every week share your story. And so like they start to learn about each other. And that's not something we do in the American culture very well. We'll say some how you doings and what's going on. And, we might sit at the bar and watch a game and kind of conversate a little bit, but I'm not going to find out where you came from, like brothers, sisters, your mom and dad background, how, what's this journey with Jesus look like for you, and so we start to learn things at a different rate because it's a prescribed thing, but it's something that's healthy that we need to carry on. The same with a prayer experience and with prayer is something that is so impactful, but if we just leave it there, it becomes this thing that we did one time. It's like, man, you remember that time that we did discipleship? Like that was kind of cool, and that's not the journey that we want. We want to go, okay, this was impactful for me. How do I make this a part of the rhythms of my life going forward? And so even in the group that I'm starting down, here this coming Sunday with, some had gone through Rooted, some hadn't. So we're going to do Rooted like maybe in the fall, but we're starting out, and like those things will be a part of the group that I lead because they were just impactful for me, and it helped me learn more about them. It helped me learn more about God. It helped me, realize that I need to be out serving, more regularly than I serve. And so I pull those things through. And so, the hope and heart is that those groups go on. And what we really want is, man, if I can get people bought in to this group thing is actually probably good for me, and get them to see that like, man, the Bible was not meant to just be read alone. It was always meant to be read in community so that you can learn from people that are farther along than you, that when you're going through something, I guarantee you in a group of 10, somebody has gone through that. And God just seems to put people together in these groups that like, they're struggling with something and this person has gone through that exact same struggle. And that's not by accident. I think, God surrounds his people with what we need in community. And so, so I think, I don't know if I fully answered your question on that, but I think that the hope and heart is that community continues past rooted. But the hope and heart is that the rhythms continue. So I don't care what you study, man. If you and I got together, the three of us got together and we studied something and filled our mind with God's word, if we prayed together throughout that time on a regular basis, if we served God's people together, and then we took some time to just celebrate and worship at the end, we'd have a pretty great semester every semester, regardless of what we decided to go through,
Can you, sorry, Peter, I'm going to jump in there as a follow-up. Like, can you, I think that's really good, talking about what, groups at large have seen, can you give us an example from your own experience? Like what rhythm, you talked about how, when you're answering, Peter, like how, and, Peter, you were talking about breaking, sometimes you need a rhythm to be broken, and then it gets filled, the Lord fills it with something else. What has been impactful to you on a new rhythm that once one was broken, a new one was filled and has kind of had staying power?
Yeah. As silly as it sounds for somebody that served the church his whole life, two things, come to mind. I think one is the daily devotion piece. I was I would say things like, I talk to God all day long, and which is true. I pray to him all day long, or I can look at these things and read God's word and do this. But like I am so more in love with God's word right now, and like hungry for it, and hungry for people that just know so much more about it. And it came from just the breaking of that idea that you talked about Jesus would, wake up while it was still dark, and he, spent time with God. And like, I don't know that I've gotten to the part when I'm waking up when it's dark, because I still love to go to bed late, but I am getting up, and the first thing that I do is I dedicate that time, and it really has just changed my outlook, and I feel it. Like if I go through 2 or 3 days without it, I feel the disconnect. And that's like, even at this stage of my life, that's probably one of the first times that I've really paid attention and felt that disconnect if I don't have that in that spot, which is very rare and new for me. And I just love it. And I'm trying to find people that I can listen to and talk about the Bible with, that are way, way smarter and understand the context and the Greek and the Hebrew and stuff, because I'm like, man, I'm just learning so much. I'm just hungry for it. So that's one. And then there's this other thing. I think because I'm not serving every single week at a church right now, like serving like on staff, like I'm not full-time at church, I'm full-time with Rooted. I realized that I really offloaded and kind of given the church the responsibility for when I show up and serve and discipleship and things like that. The way that I disciple my kids, what's my responsibility to serve my neighbors, all kind of was in the context of the church, and in our calendar. And when I stepped out of that earlier this year, and even last year during COVID, God was like, man, like, how are you being the hands and feet, and what's your responsibility to be my disciple if this Sunday experience of church doesn't come back? And it just rocked me, because I was like, man, I've just given all the responsibility to the church to tell me when to show up, when to serve, when to put me on planning center, when to go on the serve experience, when to do these things. And I was like, man, that is so backwards. And that really helped. So that those rhythms of loving and giving, open-handed generosity, those things have just really been rocked for me in the last 18 months.
Man, this has been really good. And Aaron, you're like getting more comfortable as a co-host. I love that. So
come on, Aaron.
I've got to live up to the illustrious.
You're illustrious.
Hey, speaking into V. So we have 2 final questions, and I think that this has been really important, but let's back all the way back up. And, we've kind of talked around this, but I think it's important to kind of directly say this. What makes Jesus's view of rhythms so different than the world? And I'll just leave it at that.
Man, the picture I got when you asked that question, and it was almost like a hint of emotion hit me at the same time, as at the pace in which Jesus moved, and the rhythm in which Jesus moved was so much slower than mine. And like I run from one thing to the next. I want to produce. Like if I get into an unhealthy habit, I want to show you how much production I have done. And it's nothing about the people. It's nothing about the presence of God, but it's everything is about like, look at all these things that I've done. Like, isn't that awesome? And Jesus, like he started with time alone. You would see him go out and do some amazing things, but he always retreated back to like either a small group of people or by himself with the Lord. And, and it was always this in the people he moved within. Like, we talk about some of the things that Jesus said, but there was never a harshness to people that didn't know who Jesus was. It was always to the people like us who were becoming, that were church people, that were becoming Pharisees, that were putting the non-essentials as essentials. And he was trying to knock those things out to find freedom for people. And so I just watch his rhythms were so beautiful and like gentle as he walked through, and then to those that he wasn't gentle is always because we've ramped up these other things that shouldn't be, it seems like. And so, like we need to move at that pace. I feel like.
No, that's
the only
that's
time
really
he
good.
ran was away from people trying to make him king, or ran away from people trying to, that were angry, in some regard. But it was like, the other times he was always spending time, with people, and he was spending time with the Lord. In beautiful places.
Man, that was beautiful. I love it. Well, we always close with this question. What does Jesus have to say about this topic? So what does Jesus have to say about rhythms being spiritual? And so Aaron and I answer, and then you get to clean up any mess we made. Does that sound good?
Great. Love it. Yep. I'll about clean up. Yep.
So who is it, me or you?
Sure, you can go if you want.
I'll
go. I think last week I was first.
Aaron's like so subtle. He's like, that was his way of saying you go first. Anyway, so
I go either way, whatever you want.
it's all good. Today I was reading Matthew 5, which is the Sermon on the Mount, and there's these beatitudes, and it's blessed are the merciful, blessed are the peacemakers, blessed are all these people, and Jesus is kind of laying out what we would call kingdom values of what it means to be, a follower of Jesus. And I don't think anybody reads that list and says, I don't want to be that way. And I think what Jesus is saying is that, these values, these kingdom principles, the gospel is meant to be lived out in the rhythms of our lives. And I think I'm leaving this conversation with how incredibly intentional we have to be to see God at work and to be aware. And when I say intentional, I don't mean that to be a burden, but actually just to kind of be aware. I can sit with my 10-month-old Lucy and I can be there, but I can also be on my phone, or I can be aware of what she's doing, the little intricacies of how she's pulling apart a toy and things like that. And that's kind of a weird illustration for God. But I think what rhythms do is they cause us to stop and really reflect. And I think that that's what Jesus is doing, is he's saying that these values that are from heaven, we're called to live here on earth. So that's what I'm leaving with.
That's good.
Yeah. Thank you, Peter. I think for me, as I've been thinking about this while we've been talking, I think rhythms, before we got to this conversation, I think rhythms are important. And I think it makes sense to me that the Lord wants us to have good rhythms in our lives. And the rhythms that Rooted talks about are all very important. But I think during this conversation, I've really been thinking a lot about kind of going back to where we started. We heard some of your background as a worship leader, and you were talking about rhythm in the musical context. And to me, I think there's a lot of power to that imagery too, whether or not someone is musical or not, or that's kind of their tendency. But you know that rhythms in music, I mean, they guide where everything's going, whether or not you're aware of them or not. And the rhythms that are in our lives, whether or not we're aware of them, they're very influential on what directions we're headed day to day. And so I think we should be paying attention to them, and we should be realizing that there are a number of rhythms that are very important to our spirits. And let's work hard to, especially at the beginning of this year, to just try to get them even more right. And if a small group community is a place to be plugging in to help with that, then that I think that's always a good thing. But we definitely should be paying attention to it. So anyhow, that's my thought.
Absolutely. No, those are great. And, I think as I sit here, it's funny, like, I think the reason for me and maybe for others that are listening or that I've met in the past have a problem with discipleship is its root word really is discipline, right? I mean, it's like I can't get around it. I've tried discipleship in every non-disciplined way that I possibly can try it. And God has met me in that. And he knows my personality, and he created me. He understands how I need to connect with him. But I feel like he's just over the past, let's say 10 years, has just continually been calling me into some beautiful more. And I think with the rhythms, like, it really, I'm not giving up as much as I think that I am, and the time that I treasure so much, the places that I waste it in other places, that just little times with him that can give me some sort of more insight or just some connection, or that he is with me, or that I might see somebody that I would have missed had I not been in these rhythms with God, and really, letting those rhythms permeate my daily life. Because like you said, rhythms are going to happen whether we want healthy ones or unhealthy ones. It's just which ones we're going to choose to lean into. And so for this season, I'm trying to lean into some new rhythms to just gain more understanding. And my encouragement to you guys, and I think Jesus's encouragement to us, is that those times of stretch always include some sort of risk, that faith, the risk faith kind of balance. It's like, man, to step out in faith and in risk when you don't want to share, to risk when you might not be comfortable serving, to risk when you maybe you've never prayed out loud, when you don't understand the Bible. Don't do those things alone, because it helps give you a little bit of a catch to your risk. It gives you a little bit of a safety net there when you're doing it in community. But do it, because when you step out, man, the way God meets you in that, and the insight that you gain into him, into yourself, is so valuable. And so I would just say, man, like when you watch Jesus, he was always calling those fishermen, those 12 people that turned into 72, that turned into hundreds and thousands and millions, but always calling them into something more. And he was always kind of trying to get them out of their normal rhythms into his rhythm, so that you could see something. And see the world in a different way. And I think that if we do that, that's where the magic starts to really happen in our lives, and we start to see something unique. So, yep.
Man, what a great conversation. I think it's experiencerooted.org. You can find out more about Rooted. .com. Yeah, there you go. I knew I was going to do that. Jairus, where can people find you?
Yeah, I'm on Instagram. I'm on Instagram, Jairus W1. It is a weird name, so you got to put the J and then AIR, air, and then US, and then the W1, so Jairus W1. And I'm on Twitter and Facebook and those things. But they can follow me if they like.
There we go. Well, thank you so much for being with us. We are the Why God Why Podcast. The best way to get a hold of us is to go to whygodwhypodcast.com. You can subscribe to our email, and you can get Jairus's and other great emails, other great episodes, I should say, during the next few weeks. We're looking forward for this one. Have a great day. Thank you so very much for joining us.